'Tis the season for increase of domestic abuse. Oh, it's always interesting how Christmas time is actually there's a remarkable increase in domestic abuse. I think a lot of that is because we're busy. I think a lot of childhood stuff comes up, and anytime we're pressed together and in stress, things come out that are there, but they come out a little bit stronger. So it can be very interesting to see what happens if squeezing the lemon makes lemonade or squeezing the lemon makes something else. So this podcast is about awareness. So we're going to get some awareness. This is also a really great podcast to give to somebody else that you may think may be in a domestic abuse situation, because most of us in domestic abuse situations don't even know it. And so it's really nice to have some awareness and some personal story within it. So that will help too. So again, domestic abuse really can be hard to identify because there's so many different ways of having domestic abuse. For example, in episode 10, I talk about the different styles of abuse. In episode 19, I talk about the cycle of abuse because it's super addictive how it is, which is kind of wild to think that abuse can be addictive, but it really is. But the biggest thing I would say is there's an imbalance of power. There's a fear all the time, walking on eggshells constantly. It may feel very dangerous and be very dangerous. A person may want to buffer a lot. I feel like a lot of people that really get immersed in alcohol or workaholism or multiple other things are actually covering up the feelings that are wanting to come up because they are in a toxic and abusive relationship. So it can look so many different ways. And so it can be very difficult to really be like, hey, I think there's something going on here and I need to explore that more. So the first thing I want to say that if you feel like you're in physical danger of your life, I would absolutely come up with a plan to get out, because most of the domestic abuse murders happen within 1 month of leaving. So it can be super unsafe as it really inflates the abuser and can really make people just wig out. And so it's really important to have contact the hotline. There are many shelters around. But absolutely have a plan because it can be very unsafe. And so that's very important for me to say right up front. I think it's hard to determine a domestic abuse situation. And I will say the best way to know is your body. Because our bodies, when they're in a domestic abuse situation, they're tense, they're tight, they're stressed, they're having sicknesses, they're having headaches, they're having migraines, they're having physical ailments, they're having mental challenges, all sorts of things. If a person ever thinks about killing themselves, I think that's a huge indicator. I also think if they want to kill the other person, that's a good indicator. And I think if they're going mentally, having some mental challenges, that's a good indicator. And that was my flavor of like domestic abuse, how it was coming out. Also, I had a lot of physical challenges, a lot of health issues, which is really interesting because I'm really healthy now. But it was constant taxing my immune system and my body and creating all sorts of symptoms with pain in my body and then autoimmune disorders and all sorts of stuff. So our bodies, I feel like, are the best way to be like, hey, something's wrong, something's off, and I need to investigate this. And then, it's interesting how a lot of us can tolerate bad behavior. I know I recently did a story about how, in my previous marriage, it was an example of when I was having my first baby. And my husband at the time decided, I was in serious labor, but he had to finish the chapter in his book. He had to take a shower, get ready. And by the time I got to the hospital, I was like 6, and it did not take long to have the baby. That sort of thing, I could say, oh my goodness, that was so awful. But the truth is, what was I doing tolerating bad behavior? What was up with me? And so I think the biggest thing is, like, if we're overly kind, if we're having these belief systems that are getting us into trouble, really to investigate that. So in the first 10 podcasts, I talk about the 8 reasons why I was in a domestic abuse situation and didn't even know it, and basically the different reasons why I was in it. And so, really, the biggest thing we can do is to change ourselves. Sometimes it's really impossible to change ourselves if we're in a destructive situation. And sometimes we can start changing ourselves while we're in it. And that can be really helpful. But the thing is, we can't really change others. We can have boundaries, we can have requests, and we cannot change others. And so the biggest gift we can give to ourselves really is we're like, hey, something's off. My body's react da 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 da. I feel walking on eggshells. The biggest gift we can give to ourselves this season, if you have any of those things I'm talking about, the biggest gift is to give yourself some clarity. And that doesn't mean, excuse me, that doesn't mean that you have to make a decision. I think some of us, like if we actually know what we know, we're like, oh my goodness, we have to make a decision to leave or whatever. But clarity is power. And just giving yourself the ability to open your mind to maybe not understanding this completely and trying to investigate that is the biggest gift you can give yourself. So, my situation was not physically dangerous. Like, I was not in danger of getting killed. Whereas I've had a friend that was absolutely in a physically dangerous situation, and it was very life threatening. Mine had a huge physical impact. I was like dying and having all sorts of like challenges. Like, it was time I was so bad. My hair was falling out. My legs were giving out. I couldn't keep myself warm. But it was more of a psychological, religious, all of those things, a destructive situation. And I actually made my decision to leave mid-December because that's actually my birthday. But I had decided 2 years before that, I had opened my mind, I had done some work, and I had given my husband clarity. Like, hey, what you're doing is called stonewalling and it's passive aggressive. And if you continue to do that, I will divorce you. And so, I spent 2 years like working on myself more, working on our relationship. And then mid-December chose to be like, okay, I feel I'm done. And I really felt like for me, having gone to the psych ward twice because of the stress, and I was on medication, and I would have had to stay on medication the rest of my life if I were to stay in that relationship. And I would have been in the psych ward every about 5 or 10 years because it was so stressful and crazy making. But the definition of crazy is actually doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And that's what I was doing. Another thing is if people tell you who they are, by what they're saying, but more their actions repeatedly, we need to believe them. And I had this, I'm a pretty hot, positive person, hopeful person, and I had some toxic, destructive hope that would have kept me stuck for a long time. So, because of those things, I'm like, okay, I am done. I cannot continue to raise 4 children and do it in a healthy way in this situation. And so I decided to leave. And so I actually, though, gave my husband, I'm like, hey, I'm going to be leaving at this time. And this is what it looks like. Because my husband couldn't deal with emotion and this and that. So it was just better to speak clearly and just calmly and just like, this is what's going to happen. And that's what I wanted to do. But I had actually been preparing for 2 years because when I first talked to my husband, I felt like, I don't think he really has the ability to change in our relationship. And I need to prepare for this. So I actually started working, getting a stable, well, somewhat stable career and working towards that. But really, like by that time, I'd been married 20 years and 22 when I left. And I was really suffering from years on my side of self-abandoning. My gut, my body told me that this was not good for me. It told me, many things, but I just chose to continue to stay in it. And basically, by choosing others over myself, it caused a lot of harm. That was very costly because we are made uniquely special and we are God's children. And when we don't prioritize our mental health, our physical health, and our spiritual health, then that is not only dishonoring God, but it deeply dishonors ourselves and harms ourselves. And that's what I was doing. I was not aligned with God's design, which is really to love God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and really be able to feel his love for us because he adores us like his little special children, and he's got unconditional love for us. And then next, I was loving others more than I was loving myself because I thought that was the right thing to do. But really, God says that we are to love others as we love ourselves. And so, really loving ourselves and valuing ourselves and giving ourselves the kindness that we are supposed to have is super important. And I had years and years of self abandoning, and that came at a high cost. And that was not good for me. Happy holidays! I wanted to make your season a little brighter and lighter, and so I'm offering two things for free. One is a relaxing meditation, and the other one is the BARF notebook, and that is the system for working through our feelings and our thoughts by barfing them out, sorting them out, and planning them out. Those are both for free on the website at livebrighter.info. So go ahead and go there and pick up your free gift to help support you this holiday season, and live brighter every day. Make it a great day. So leaving was super hard. Like in my situation, I looked like everyone had decided that I was bipolar, and everyone had decided that Mark was amazing. That was my husband. And he looked good, he sounded good, and I did not have the words to describe the abuse. I lacked terms, and I lacked the ability to understand it, and I was dying. Physically, mentally, spiritually, I was dying. But I lacked the ability. So I actually had to leave, make this plan, and not tell anyone. And, that's unfortunate. But the reason why is everyone had their opinions, and I knew I had to do this or I would not survive. And so it was really tough because I did not tell my friends. I did not tell my parents. I did not tell anyone. I left, had the plan, made the plan, left. And then I just chose that if people wanted to listen to me and hear me, then I would talk to them. But I could not control others' perspectives. I could not control how they were going to view it. And of course, I looked absolutely crazy because I was leaving my husband. And so I just knew that time would tell the truth. And I just trusted God and Jesus, even though I had so many thoughts about like, oh my goodness, divorce is the worst sin ever. But I just chose that God and Jesus, his character is different. And I don't think that's true. And I'm going to just, even though I don't understand it, I'm going to just embrace them and get my love and support from them. And I'm just going to do this. And I just wanted to be an example be able to take care of my kids was the biggest thing. But now I feel like I'm an example of what's possible because not only did I get out, and it was, it's challenging, very challenging, and work on myself for years. And that's why I created the Unravel Notebook, is to help others work on themselves. And again, that's available on Amazon. But that was the process I did to help work through my brain, to get to a place to have a healthy love for myself and then have a beautiful relationship with my husband now. Like, boy, what a contrast. I mean, we are just such a team and we can just love and respect each other and have such delight in each other. And there's equality, respect, and we can have hard conversations and we can work through things as a team. And it's so beautiful, and I would have never thought that could happen in this way. So it's an example of what's possible. So just an example, I had one of my daughters, and she was the one that was most not happy with me about the divorce. And my daughter, the other day, she says, you know what, the divorce was really good and it helped her dad. And it really has. It's really great. And I think for her to acknowledge that, it was huge because she really saw me as the one that was making her dad's life miserable, which it did for a while, but he's a much better person. And that same daughter called me out on my parenting because I recommended to her and her boyfriend several books. And one of them was, I'll think of it in a second, but it basically talks about intimacy. And I might just have to put it in the notes. But anyways, it's talking about intimacy, and it brings up the fact that if you as a kid had strong feelings and your parents did not console you or help you with those feelings, then it's very hard to connect and have emotional intimacy with others because emotional intimacy involves being vulnerable and the other person soothing. And that's what creates intimacy. So she totally called me out and said, you know what, because she had strong emotions. She was my spicy girl. She had strong emotions, and I would just send her to her room until she could come out and all of that, and that was not helping her. And the book's called How We Love, by the way. Super great book. And she called me out, and I'm like, you know what? You are so right. I did not soothe you when you guys were hurting, and I am so sorry. And I did not have the emotional bandwidth to do that. And I can see how that would be really harmful. And so, it's so good because I have allowed my kids to bring up things, and just I want them to have a space, to bring up things and their interpretation of their childhood and their interpretation of things, and to have those open dialogues, because I do want to work through those things. So, and then in the same week, my other daughter told me, it was actually last night, she said, Mom, if you would have stayed with Dad, I would have repeated the same pattern, because I wouldn't have known that there was anything wrong. And I wouldn't have learned all this information you've taught me about my mind. And I'm like, oh my goodness, that's so amazing, to have those switches and being able to be a generation changer. So I want to tell you something. Healing is hard, and it's so much easy than continuing with the status quo. So how do we get the gift of clarity? Sorry, I'm having a little frog in my throat. So the gift of clarity, number one, learn to love yourself. And also, when you start to love yourself, you can start verbalizing things that can make a difference in the relationship, and it may not, just so you know. But you can actually advocate for yourself in a way that's actually going to be received. And again, you cannot control that part to a degree. So the second one, you with clarity, you have the ability to choose rather than be the victim. Like, I've known people that have chosen, like, I'm going to stay in this situation, but I'm a different person, and I'm willing to have, I like my reasons for staying. But it's very conscious and it's very clear. But having clarity and the ability to choose is so much better feeling than being the victim and not choosing. The third one for clarity is, a lot of times we will inflate the worst case scenario, and rather than inflating the worst case scenarios, if I leave, what's this going to be like? Investigate. And, like I said, I had a plan, and it wasn't easy, and it was just light years better than what I was in. Fourth, I would say seek resources. And it starts with opening our minds. I feel like God will give you what you need. Universe will give you when you need, if you're willing to open your mind and be like, you know what, there's something off. I don't know what it is, but I'm willing to open my mind. It could be counseling. It could be the Unravel Notebook available on Amazon. It can be life coaching. It could be podcasts. It could be a host of things, but God will show you what you need. And then just to start healing our own wounds. Like, I had a lot of beliefs and wounds that were basically exposed and made it much worse to see things for what they were. So, like, healing my own wounds was huge. And then also, none of this can really happen. I'll be honest. None of this can happen if we don't make space for ourselves. If we don't make space for our healing work. If we don't take the time to investigate, to listen, to get quiet with ourselves, to be honest with ourselves. So making a little space for ourselves is huge. So I have a nonprofit called Hope Harbor Transitional Living. If you guys are listening to this and you've been in a domestic abuse situation, or you're passionate about it, definitely would love your donations at hopeharbortransitionalliving.com. And also, something that we have with Hope Harbor Transitional Living is it offers rental assistance, and it offers counseling assistance to those that are recovering from domestic abuse situations. And those are huge. And we just adjusted it so that we could do counseling assistance without being in the full-blown program. And I'm just so happy. And there's basically a matching of up to $200 a month to be able to do that. And so if anyone thinks I don't have the time or the money, there's another opportunity. So Hope Harbor Transitional Living.com, and look into that. So again, if you know somebody in a domestic abuse situation that you may want to pass this along. And right now, I just want you to just take a deep breath in and breathe out slowly. It's always good to do this in the holidays. And then take another belly breath in and breathe out slowly. If there's something that came to mind in this podcast, set that aside and do a little bit more work on that, writing about it. Jesus came to be peace on earth and goodwill to men. And the best peace we can have on earth is the peace in our own hearts. And that is the gift of clarity. I believe in you. I believe in us. Make it a great holiday season and grow 1% at a time.